World War I, the start of modern warfare and one of history's deadliest conflicts.
At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe stood at the height of its power and the brink of its destruction. Empires stretched across continents. Kings, emperors, and politicians believed they were maintaining peace, but beneath this illusion, rivalries had been intensifying for decades. Industrial growth had transformed warfare, economies, and societies. Nations were no longer just competing politically. They were competing militarily, economically, and ideologically. Europe was divided into two major alliance systems. On one side stood the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia, united not out of friendship, but mutual concern over Germany's rapid rise. On the other stood the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, bound by treaties meant to deter aggression, but in reality designed to prepare for it. These alliances created a dangerous balance. A conflict between two nations could trigger obligations that would pull in multiple others. Peace was no longer a matter of diplomacy alone. It was a fragile web of commitments. Germany, unified only in 1871, had become an industrial powerhouse in a remarkably short time. Its factories produced steel, weapons, and machinery at unprecedented rates. Its military doctrine emphasized speed, precision, and coordination. But its rapid growth also unsettled its neighbors, particularly Britain, whose naval supremacy was now being challenged by Germany's expanding fleet. Britain responded by accelerating its own naval buildup. This triggered a naval arms race, one defined by battleships, dreadnoughts, and technological competition on the seas. France, still recovering from the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, carried both a sense of loss and determination. The regions of Alsace and Lorraine, taken by Germany, remained symbols of national humiliation and unfinished business. Russia, vast in territory but fragile in governance, faced internal instability, industrial lag, and political unrest. Yet it remained deeply invested in the Balkans, where Slavic nationalism aligned with its strategic interests. Austria-Hungary, a multi-ethnic empire composed of numerous national groups, was increasingly unstable. Ethnic tensions simmered beneath the surface as subject populations demanded autonomy or independence. The empire relied heavily on maintaining unity through force and political control. Nowhere were tensions higher than in the Balkans, a region marked by competing nationalisms, territorial disputes, and great power interference. This region became known as the powder keg of Europe, because even a small spark could ignite a much larger explosion. Across Europe, militarism shaped national policy. Governments believed in preparing for war as a necessity rather than an option. Military leaders gained influence over political decisions. War plans were developed in advance, with detailed mobilization schedules that left little room for flexibility. Railways, factories, and infrastructure were all aligned with wartime readiness. Nations maintained large standing armies, stocked weapons, and trained citizens in preparation for a conflict many believed was inevitable. At the same time, nationalism intensified loyalty to one's own country, while deepening distrust of others. Propaganda, education, and political rhetoric reinforced the idea that national strength must be defended at all costs. By 1914, Europe was not at peace. It was in a prolonged state of tension, waiting for a crisis to push it over the edge. On June 28, 1914, a seemingly routine diplomatic visit would become one of the most consequential moments in modern history. In Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, arrived with his wife Sophie. Their visit was intended to demonstrate imperial authority and stability in a region increasingly influenced by nationalist movements. But beneath the surface, unrest was already present. A group of Bosnian Serb nationalists, opposed to Austro-Hungarian rule, had plotted to assassinate the Archduke. They were loosely connected to the Black Hand, a secret organization that supported Serbian nationalism and sought to unify Slavic territories. Earlier that day, one of the conspirators attempted to attack the Archduke with a bomb, but the attempt failed. The Archduke's motorcade continued through the city, unaware of how close it had come to disaster. Later, due to a navigation error, the driver took a wrong turn and stopped near a cafe where Gavrilo Princip, one of the conspirators, happened to be standing. In a moment shaped by chance and timing, Princip stepped forward and fired 2 shots at close range. Franz Ferdinand and his wife were fatally wounded. The assassination sent immediate shockwaves through Austria, Hungary, and across Europe. However, the event itself was not enough to start a world war. What followed was a complex chain of political decisions, miscalculations, and escalating demands. Austria-Hungary viewed the assassination as an opportunity to suppress Serbian nationalism once and for all. With the backing of Germany, which offered unconditional support, known historically as a blank check, Austria-Hungary prepared a firm response. An ultimatum was issued to Serbia, containing demands that effectively compromised Serbian sovereignty. While Serbia accepted most of the conditions, it rejected key elements that would allow Austro-Hungarian officials to operate within its borders. This partial rejection gave Austria-Hungary the justification it needed to declare war. What began as a regional crisis was now on the path to becoming a global conflict. Russia, seeing itself as a protector of Slavic nations and an ally of Serbia, began mobilizing its army. Germany interpreted Russian mobilization as a direct threat and prepared its own forces in response. Diplomatic negotiations failed under the pressure of rigid military plans and political commitments. Within weeks, Europe moved from tension to war. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, initiating the first formal step in what would become a global conflict. Russia responded by mobilizing to defend Serbia. Germany demanded Russia halt its mobilization. When Russia refused, Germany declared war on Russia. Germany then turned its attention to France, anticipating its involvement due to alliance obligations. To execute its military strategy, Germany activated the Schlieffen Plan, a pre-designed operation intended to avoid fighting a prolonged war on 2 fronts. The plan required a rapid invasion of France through neutral Belgium. Belgium's neutrality had been guaranteed by international treaties, making Germany's invasion a major violation of international law. Britain, committed to protecting Belgian neutrality, issued an ultimatum demanding Germany withdraw its forces. Germany refused. As a result, Britain declared war on Germany. In a matter of days, all major European powers were engaged in war. Millions of soldiers were mobilized. Rail networks transported troops toward the front lines at unprecedented speed. Public sentiment in many countries initially supported the war, with widespread belief that it would be short and decisive. Germany's early advance through Belgium encountered resistance at Liège, delaying its timetable. Reports of civilian casualties and destruction influenced international opinion and increased hostility toward Germany. France launched its own offensive, aiming to reclaim Alsace-Lorraine, but its forces were quickly pushed back by German advances. The British Expeditionary Force joined French troops, engaging German forces in a series of battles. Despite initial efforts, Allied forces were forced into retreat. The rapid movement of early campaigns would soon give way to a more static and deadly form of warfare. As German forces approached Paris, Allied armies regrouped along the Marne River. In September 1914, the First Battle of the Marne marked a decisive turning point. French and British forces launched a coordinated counterattack, halting the German advance and forcing a retreat. This failure ended Germany's plan for a quick victory. Following the battle, both sides attempted to outflank each other in what became known as the Race to the Sea. Instead of open maneuver warfare, armies began digging defensive positions that would stretch across northern France and Belgium. These trenches evolved into complex systems of defense, including front-line trenches, support lines, and communication trenches. Life in the trenches was harsh and dangerous. Soldiers endured constant shelling, mud, flooding, disease, and the psychological strain of prolonged combat. No Man's Land, the area between opposing trenches, became one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Attacks across this zone often resulted in heavy casualties due to machine guns, artillery, and barbed wire defenses. Traditional military tactics proved ineffective against modern firepower, leading to prolonged stalemates that defined the Western Front. Global expansion and new technologies. As the war progressed, it expanded beyond Europe into a truly global conflict. On the Eastern Front, Russia faced Germany and Austria-Hungary across vast territories. Unlike the Western Front, this front saw more movement, but also significant logistical challenges and heavy losses for Russia. Naval warfare became increasingly important. Britain enforced a blockade to cut off German supplies, while Germany responded with submarine warfare using U-boats to target Allied shipping. The introduction of unrestricted submarine warfare blurred the lines between military and civilian targets. Outside Europe, colonial possessions became battlegrounds. German colonies in Africa were attacked by Allied forces, while Japan joined the Allies and seized German territories in the Pacific. The Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of the Central Powers, opening new fronts in the Middle East. Campaigns such as Gallipoli demonstrated the difficulty of amphibious operations and entrenched defense. Technological innovation accelerated during the war. Poison gas was introduced, creating a new and terrifying dimension of warfare. Gas masks became essential for survival. Aircraft evolved from reconnaissance tools into combat machines, leading to the birth of aerial dogfights and strategic bombing. Despite these innovations, the war remained locked in stalemate across most fronts. By 1916 and into 1917, World War I had fundamentally changed in character. It was no longer a war of movement, bold maneuvers, or rapid victories. It had become a grinding war of attrition, where success was measured not by territory gained, but by how long a nation could endure before collapsing under the weight of exhaustion, casualties, and resource shortages. On the Western Front, both sides were locked in an endless stalemate. Trenches stretched across hundreds of miles, from the North Sea down through Belgium and into eastern France. Neither side could break through the other's defenses without sustaining catastrophic losses. This led to a strategy that defined this phase of the war: attrition through constant pressure. The Battle of Verdun in 1916 became one of the most powerful symbols of this strategy. Germany's objective was not simply to capture territory, but to bleed France white, to force the French army into a prolonged defensive battle that would drain its manpower and morale. Verdun turned into a battlefield of unimaginable intensity. Continuous artillery bombardments reshaped the landscape, reducing forts, forests, and villages to rubble. Soldiers lived and fought in conditions where survival itself became the primary objective. Both sides rotated troops through the front, knowing that holding ground, even temporarily, came at an enormous human cost. France, determined not to yield, reinforced Verdun at all costs. The phrase, "they shall not pass," became symbolic of French resistance. Despite overwhelming pressure, French forces managed to hold the line, but only after enduring massive casualties. Meanwhile, to relieve pressure on Verdun, the Allies launched a major offensive along the Somme River in mid-1916. The Battle of the Somme became one of the deadliest battles in human history. On the first day alone, tens of thousands of soldiers were killed or wounded. The offensive exposed the harsh reality of modern warfare. Machine guns, artillery, and fortified defenses made traditional infantry advances extremely costly. Despite months of fighting, gains were measured in mere miles. The battle failed to achieve a decisive breakthrough, but it further drained German resources and tied down its forces. It was during this period that new technologies began to emerge as attempts to break the deadlock. One of the most significant innovations was the tank. Designed to cross trenches, crush barbed wire, and withstand small arms fire, tanks represented a new approach to battlefield mobility. However, early tanks were mechanically unreliable, slow, and limited in effectiveness. Still, they signaled the beginning of mechanized warfare. At sea, the war continued to evolve as well. Britain maintained its naval blockade of Germany, restricting imports of food and raw materials. This blockade began to have serious effects on the German population, contributing to shortages and hardship on the home front. Germany responded with submarine warfare, using U-boats to target Allied shipping. Initially, submarine attacks were conducted with restrictions, but over time, Germany adopted unrestricted submarine warfare, attacking merchant and passenger ships without warning. This strategy had a profound impact on global diplomacy. Civilian casualties increased, and neutral nations began to take notice of the risks posed by submarine warfare. The cumulative effect of these developments was a war that no longer offered clear opportunities for victory, only prolonged survival. By 1917, the human and economic costs of the war were becoming increasingly unsustainable for many nations. Armies were exhausted. Civilian populations were strained by shortages, inflation, and loss of life. Governments faced growing internal pressure as public morale declined. It was in this context that the war began to destabilize not just on the battlefield, but within the nations themselves. Germany continued its submarine campaign, aiming to cut Britain off from vital supplies. However, this strategy risked provoking powerful new enemies. At the same time, diplomatic tensions escalated as intercepted communications revealed Germany's attempts to influence other nations. These developments would soon bring a major new power into the conflict. Meanwhile, Russia was experiencing severe internal instability. Years of war had weakened its economy and military. Food shortages, poor leadership, and mounting casualties led to widespread dissatisfaction among the population. This internal pressure eventually erupted into revolution. The Tsarist government collapsed, and political authority shifted through a period of upheaval. Eventually, a new revolutionary government took control, seeking to withdraw Russia from the war in order to focus on internal restructuring. Russia's exit from the war significantly altered the balance on the Eastern Front, freeing German forces to concentrate more resources in the West. However, even with this advantage, the war was no longer simply about military strength. It was about endurance, political stability, and the ability to sustain a prolonged global conflict. By 1918, the war had reached its final phase. Germany, recognizing that time was running out, launched a series of major offensives on the Western Front. These attacks were designed to achieve a breakthrough before fresh American forces could fully arrive and tip the balance in favor of the Allies. At first, these offensives achieved significant territorial gains. German troops advanced deeper into Allied lines than at any point since the early stages of the war. For a brief moment, it appeared that Germany might still force a decisive outcome. However, these gains came at a cost. German forces were stretched thin, supply lines were overextended, and troops were increasingly exhausted after years of continuous combat. Unlike earlier in the war, there were no reserves of fresh manpower or resources large enough to sustain prolonged offensives at this scale. Meanwhile, the Allies had begun to coordinate their efforts more effectively. With the arrival of American troops, fresh manpower and industrial support strengthened Allied capabilities. The United States brought not only soldiers, but also economic resources, manufacturing capacity, and renewed strategic momentum. The turning point came as Allied forces launched a series of coordinated counteroffensives. Rather than relying on a single decisive battle, the Allies implemented a continuous push across multiple sectors of the front. This strategy, later known as the 100 Days Offensive, gradually forced German forces into retreat. Bit by bit, German positions were abandoned. Towns, trenches, and defensive lines that had been held for years began to fall back under sustained pressure. At the same time, Germany's allies were collapsing. Austria-Hungary faced internal fragmentation as ethnic groups within the empire pushed for independence. The Ottoman Empire, stretched across multiple fronts in the Middle East, struggled to maintain control as Allied forces advanced. Bulgaria also faced defeat and withdrew from the war. Inside Germany itself, political instability began to rise. Food shortages, war fatigue, and dissatisfaction with leadership contributed to unrest among both civilians and soldiers. The once unified war effort began to fracture from within. By late 1918, it became clear to German military leadership that continuing the war was no longer viable. Efforts were made to seek an armistice, an agreement to stop fighting. At the same time, political changes unfolded rapidly within Germany. The Kaiser abdicated, ending the imperial government, and a new civilian leadership emerged to negotiate peace. On November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed between Germany and the Allied powers. At 11 a.m., fighting ceased on the Western Front. The silence that followed marked the end of one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. But while the guns fell silent, the consequences of the war were only beginning. The aftermath of World War I reshaped the global order. Empires that had existed for centuries, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, and the German Empire, either collapsed or were fundamentally transformed. New nations emerged across Europe and the Middle East, redrawing borders and redefining national identities. However, these new boundaries often created tensions that would persist long after the war ended. The peace process that followed sought to establish long-term stability, but also imposed strict conditions on defeated nations. Germany, in particular, faced territorial losses, military restrictions, and significant financial reparations. These measures had profound economic and political effects, contributing to instability in the years that followed. In an effort to prevent future global conflict, international leaders established the League of Nations. This organization was designed to promote diplomacy, cooperation, and collective security among nations. While its intentions were ambitious, its effectiveness would ultimately be limited. World War I marked a turning point in human history. It demonstrated the devastating power of industrialized warfare, where technology, logistics, and total national mobilization determined outcomes on an unprecedented scale. It revealed how interconnected political systems could escalate regional disputes into global conflicts. And perhaps most importantly, it showed how fragile peace can be when built upon competing alliances, rising nationalism, and unresolved tensions. In the end, the war that began with a single assassination in Sarajevo became a global catastrophe that reshaped the 20th century. Its legacy would continue to influence politics, borders, and conflicts for decades to come. And its echoes would not end with the armistice, because the world that emerged from World War I was already on the path toward future upheavals that would once again test the limits of nations, alliances, and humanity itself.